Hey everybody, in this video we're talking about the Quintessence Harmonizer Plethora X1 and Original and the available scales. We'll touch on how modes are implemented and more importantly how to unlock some extra scales from the existing scale list. So let's start with that scale list. There are 18 different defined scales available on the Harmonizer. On the Plethora you can scroll through these by turning the C knob. I talked about these briefly in the previous Harmonizer video, so check that out if you haven't seen it and you want a little bit more context. This list is pretty overwhelming, so let's break it down into groups that make it easier to digest. We can start with modal families, so we have major scale modes, melodic minor modes, and harmonic minor modes. We have a couple of pentatonic scales, and let's say blues is a close cousin, and then we just have the diminished and whole tone scales left, which are kind of their own thing. I think of these as exotic repetitive step pattern scales. These are sometimes called symmetrical or synthetic scales. Now the scale list is a lot easier to think about when we chunk it into these 5 groups, and it makes the list a little bit more accessible. Now that we've touched on modes and these groupings, I want to talk about something that's been bugging me about the original Quintessence pedal implementation. It's not technically wrong, but I do think it's interesting to discuss and is relevant. On the original Quintessence pedal, there was a key selector knob and a sharp switch to set the root note, and a scale selector knob which had the first 6 modes of the major scale and 1 custom slot where, according to what I've read, you could set one of the 18 predefined scales with the tone print app. I'm not entirely sure how that worked because this is a different setting than the 3 tone print slots which are on the Harmony selector knob. I've never owned or even used this pedal, so I may be mistaken, but when I first saw the images, I immediately thought, why would they use all of the 6 named slots on the scale selector for the major scale shape so that I only have 1 slot left for the other scale types? To use anything in the melodic minor, harmonic minor, pentatonic, diminished or whole tone scale families, I would have to set the custom slot using the tone print app. This layout means unless you use the tone print app, most of the scale types were lost. This seems like a frustrating user experience, especially when I can effectively use the key selector to pick any mode of the major scale that I want. As an example, if the first scale was just major scale and I wanted to play in A Dorian, then I'd just select major scale as the scale type and G as the key. I know that Dorian is the second mode of the major scale, so to play A Dorian, I need to select a key where A is the second note. So I set it for the G major scale, and that would give me the right set of notes. And I just play knowing that A is my root note, even though it says G on the pedal. Initially I thought maybe there's something about stepwise or diatonic harmonization I'm missing here, but I don't think that's the case. Here's the pedal set to A Dorian. And now with the pedal set to G Ionian playing the same Dorian notes. It sounds the same because the set of notes we use is the same for both modes. So theoretically, we could have had a scale selector like this, and then you could access all the available scales and their modes just by using the knobs and setting the key to the appropriate root note. When I say appropriate root note, I mean the appropriately adjusted root note for the relative mode of the parent scale, or putting it another way, you choose the root note that gives you the right set of notes. If this sounds even a little confusing, then the reason why they didn't do this is obvious. Different people think about modes in different ways. Some people think of them as relative modes. Some people think of them as parallel modes. Some people think of them both ways. Sometimes it depends a bit on what you're actually doing. So some people watching this will completely understand what I'm talking about with changing the scale selector, and other people will be thinking, I would never use the pedal if it was like that. It needs to be as simple and direct as possible. I want to select Dorian and A and I'm done, and then I can play. And I get it. I'm totally okay with that. If you use modes musically in the way that you want to, then that is the goal achieved. And ultimately, I don't even own this pedal. I'm using the Plethora for these sounds, and I think the Plethora X1 UI is much better. You can access any of the 18 scales with the C knob, and the B knob is a complete chromatic sweep, so the sharp switch is gone as well. So where are we actually going with this? A while ago, I fell into playing a new scale that I really like the sound of. It was a major scale with a flat seventh, so it had a dominant sound, but it wasn't Mixolydian. It was like that, but with a flat sixth. When I looked it up, I was shocked to find out that it was called Mixolydian flat six, but it's also known as Aeolian dominant, and the Hindu scale. Let's compare it to the major scale and the natural minor scale. It's like the bottom half of the scale is major, and the top half of the scale is natural minor, which is the exact opposite of the melodic minor scale. So you should probably not be surprised that the Hindu scale is actually the fifth mode of the melodic minor scale. After I made the harmonic minor harmonizer video, I thought I should try out the Hindu scale with harmony, and I soon discovered it was not on the scale list by any of its names. So I thought maybe I can make a tone print and define the scale that way, but you're still limited to the existing scale list for choices, which is disappointing but understandable. So now, the idea of choosing a parent scale type and using an appropriate root note to select the correct set of notes for the mode that you want to play becomes more relevant. If I want to play and harmonize the Hindu scale in A, then I can select melodic minor as my scale type, and then, because I know that the Hindu scale is the fifth mode, I need to pick the root note for the melodic minor scale where A is the fifth note. So, A, G, F, E, D. I set the root note to D. Here's how the harmonized Hindu scale sounds. If my explanation of how to set the pedal for the Hindu scale harmonization was a bit confusing, don't worry. I've made a chart of all the missing modes that I could think of and how to set them. Some of these are a bit exotic, but I didn't want to leave anything out. Having said that, the blues scale technically has modes, but they're super weird and hard to use, and I think they're outside of the scope of this list. I've also excluded the diminished and whole tone scales because they are very repetitive step patterns and they already exist on the scale list. Let's talk about how to use this chart and how there's a few approaches depending on how fluent you are in scale theory. Anything with a check mark is included in the original scale list. The major scale modes are on here really for completeness, and I think comparing these to other scales makes it easier to understand. Let's start with an easy example and say you wanted to play in G Lydian, but we'll use the parent major scale Ionian to dial it in. If we know our scales really well and already know that G Lydian has F sharp and C sharp, then we might just think 2 sharps, it's D major. If you read a lot of sheet music, not tab, then this is probably not a huge leap. Not everybody can do that though. So here's another approach. We know Lydian is the fourth mode, so if we count 3, 2, 1 down the Lydian scale from G, 3, 2, 1 is F sharp, E, D. So we get that same result of D major, but a completely different method. Let's say we're more of a scale pattern player than a note player, and we're a little fuzzy on the G Lydian scale notes. Again, we know Lydian is the fourth mode, so if G is the 4, then one tone above that would make A the 5. So if G and A are the 4 and the 5, then 3-chord song theory or playing blues in different keys would tell us that D is the 1 or the root, because D, G and A go together. So again, using a different path, we get that same result of D major. If we're less familiar with a chosen scale, maybe we're using a melodic minor mode or whatever, we can just count the distance in half steps, which we derive from the parent scale step pattern. That's what this column contains. It doesn't matter if you think of these as half steps, semitones or frets, functionally it's all the same thing. So back to our G Lydian example. We want to add up the half steps between the parent scale root and the 4th degree, or the 4th note of the scale, because Lydian is the 4th mode and therefore uses the 4th degree as the modal root. So if we're starting from the root note, our parent scale pattern whole, half gets us to the 4th degree. Whole, half equates to 2 plus 2 plus 1 half steps. So our modal root is 5 half steps above the parent scale root, whatever that may be. So counting backwards from our modal root of G, that we do know, down 5 half steps, we can go F sharp, F, E, D sharp, D. D major is the correct answer again. This is not the fastest way, but it is fairly simple to count it out. So now you can dial in any one of these 12 extra scale modes. Adding these to the original 18 scales gives you a total of 30 different harmony options. The extra ones are a little bit trickier to dial in, but if you have the chart, you should be fine. I'll leave a link in the description, and you can come back and watch this anytime you need a refresher. If you like what I'm doing here, please like the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. If you have any questions or something to add, do leave a comment. And now, to prove this actually works, here's some music I put together in A Mixolydian flat 6 or Aeolian dominant or the Hindu scale using the Plethora Quintessence harmony effect. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.